On February 24, 2022, Vladimir Putin made the single most stupid decision in Russia's history. He invaded Ukraine. Putin thought it would be easy. A few days, maybe a couple of weeks at most, and Ukraine would crumble. But Putin was wrong. And over 4 years later, he is finally waking up to his folly. Putin destroyed 100% of Russia, burning the country's military, reputation, and himself to the ground in the process for just 1% of Ukraine. That seems like a tiny number, right? However, it's all that Russia has managed to snatch from Ukraine since the initial year of Putin's invasion, as Putin has sacrificed over 1.26 million of Russia's people to a war that shows no signs of ending. Before we explore the numbers that lead to the 1% figure and what they really mean for Russia, let's head back in time. Right back to February 24th, 2022. Putin chose that day to send 200,000 of Russia's soldiers, many of whom were from the most elite divisions the country has to offer, into Ukraine. This was a horrendous day for Ukraine. Russia's forces advanced from the north, east, and south of the country, bringing along thousands of pieces of equipment, along with launching an air campaign that involved dozens of aircraft and missiles. This was the flash invasion. Putin thought the job was done almost as soon as it started, as he believed that Kyiv would fall in 3 days and Russia would control Ukraine before the West woke up and had any chance to even argue about it. And for a while there, Russia did well. Its soldiers stormed through Ukraine as what goes down as the most productive period of the invasion for Putin. Sure, days turned into weeks, which turned into months. However, Russia advanced quickly through a large portion of 2022, at one point even getting within a few dozen miles of Kyiv. But what Putin never expected was that Ukraine would fight back. Countering Russia's moves and taking advantage of Putin's arrogance, Ukraine's forces managed to push Russia out of the Kyiv sector, in addition to eliminating the troops that Putin had sent to the Kharkiv and Chernihiv regions. Odessa was also successfully defended, but there's no denying that Russia made its best gains by the end of 2022. Mariupol and much of the Donbass ended up occupied, as did some key regions of Zaporizhia. But still, this was a failure. Ukraine was supposed to fall in weeks, yet it had survived 2022. All that Putin ultimately achieved was laying the groundwork for a war that has seen Russia make paltry gains ever since. By the end of 2022, and even much earlier, some of the world's most prominent military think tanks were already branding Putin's Ukraine invasion an abject failure. Russia had lost 109,000 troops who were killed or wounded by the end of that first year. As early as April 2022, the Royal United Services Institute was lambasting Russia for its intellectual failures and a bungled invasion. Putin had exposed the Russian military's terrible logistical planning, inadequate communications capabilities, and the enormous number of losses that nobody had seen coming. Fast forward to the end of 2022, and the Atlantic Council mirrored these sentiments, noting the failure of Russia's invasion. Daniel Fried summed it up best for the outlet, saying, "Putin's corrupt system, fueled by theft and deceit, has hollowed out the Russian military and left Russian society generally cynical." Russia had made some gains, sure, but Putin hadn't destroyed Ukraine, and as he would soon find out, 2022 was as good as it was ever going to get for Russia and its catastrophe of an invasion. The paltry gains that Russia has made since that initial year add up to a pathetic 1.4% of Ukraine. We're going to dig into that figure a little deeper in just a minute, but first you might be thinking that something seems a little off. The media has told you that Russia currently controls about 20% of Ukraine, and it isn't lying to you. That is indeed how much of Ukraine Russia occupies, give or take a percentage point. But what these reports often fail to explain is that almost all of these gains came either during the first year of the invasion, which we've already established was a failure, or in some cases, long before Putin launched his full-scale attack. Take Crimea, for instance. Russia illegally annexed the Crimean Peninsula back in 2014, catching Ukraine by complete surprise and taking advantage of Ukraine not being prepared to defend its territory. Crimea accounts for a little under 5% of Ukraine's territory, according to Durham University, which means that Russia's invasion advances actually add up to about 15% of the country. Already, we're starting to see less impressive percentages than Putin would want to see after 4 years of war, showcasing just how stupid his decision was. But let's come back to the 1.4% figure. United24 Media provides a useful rundown of what the Ukraine war has looked like for Russia since the beginning of 2023. In that year, Russia managed to capture about 600 square kilometers, or around 231 square miles of Ukraine. Those tiny gains came amidst Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive, and they amount to just 0.1% of Ukraine's territory. Russia expended 253,000 soldiers to make those gains. In 2024, Russia fared a little better. About 3,500 square kilometers of Ukraine came under Russian occupation. That amounts to about 1,350 square miles, or roughly 0.5 to 0.6% of the country. Hey, that's 5 times better than 2023 at least. But Russia also lost somewhere close to double the soldiers, as 431,000 Russian troops fell to Ukraine's defenses in that year. Then came 2025, Russia's best year since 2022. But Putin can't get excited about that. Where his military managed to take about 15% of Ukraine in 2022, it only managed between 0.7 and 0.8% of the country in 2025. That's 20 times less territory than the initial year of the invasion, and it adds up to 4,500 square kilometers, or about 1,737 square miles. Another 418,000 Russian soldiers were sacrificed at the pyre of Putin's ambition for these almost non-existent gains. And it wasn't just these soldiers that Putin sacrificed to make these gains. He has ruined Russia itself. Stick with us as we'll explore how in just a couple of minutes. First, let's tally everything up. Between the beginning of 2023 and the end of 2025, Russia has managed to capture just 8,600 square kilometers, or 3,320 square miles of Ukraine. That amounts to 1.4% that we've already mentioned several times already. To capture this territory, Putin sacrificed 1,102,000 of Russia's soldiers. In other words, Russia burned through almost 332 soldiers for every square mile of Ukraine that it gained during the past 3 years. This is what it means to burn your country to the ground in return for almost nothing. And if we take a wider view, we realize that it's not just soldiers who have been sacrificed to Putin's war. The entire Russian military has been crippled due to the sheer amount of equipment that it's lost. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost over 11,700 tanks since Putin launched his invasion. More than 24,000 armored vehicles have gone the way of the Dodo, in addition to over 37,600 artillery systems, 1,300 air defense systems, more than 430 aircraft, and almost 350 helicopters. Russia's once dreaded Black Sea Fleet has been withdrawn, with a third of it being destroyed by Ukraine's missiles and drones. Russia has spent the last 3 years winning approximately nothing of any real value in Ukraine. Instead, all that Putin has achieved is showcasing to the world how Russia is a military power on the decline. And it gets so much worse for Russia when we factor in the sheer financial cost of everything that Putin has failed to achieve in Ukraine. But before we get to that, if this is the kind of insight that you crave, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. Now, it's no secret that Russia has pulled billions of dollars out of the public purse to fund Putin's invasion. However, there's a little twist that comes into play. We'll get to that twist soon, but let's focus on the official figures first. United 24 Media highlights Russia's official war budget for each year of the war. In 2022, Russia spent $102 billion, followed by $109 billion in 2023, $149 billion in 2024, and somewhere in the region of $150 billion in 2025. The Moscow Times disputes the 2025 figure, claiming that Russia actually spent $168.8 billion. However, both outlets agree that Russia looks set to spend another $161 to $167 billion in 2026. These are official figures as best as we can get them from Russia, and they already tell the story of an invasion that has spiraled well out of Putin's control. In total, and from the start of Putin's invasion until the end of 2026, Russia will have spent around $677 billion on its military, assuming United 24 Media's figures are correct. While Russia will claim that not all of this money goes toward funding the invasion, it's still a ridiculous amount of cash that far exceeds the less than $80 billion that Russia set aside for its invasion in 2022. By the end of 2026, Russia will have spent almost 8.5 times more than it intended on the so-called special military operation. In the 2023 to 25 period, Russia's expenditures amount to about $408 billion for the 1.4% of Ukraine that it's managed to claim in that period. Breaking it down even further, what this means is that Russia has spent a mind-blowing $122.89 million for every square mile that it's managed to claim in Ukraine, officially. And here is where the twist comes in. What Russia tells us that it's spending and what it's really spending are two very different things. Since the start of the invasion, official expenditures alone have surpassed $500 billion. Experts say hundreds of billions more remain hidden, including loans issued by state banks to defense enterprises across Russia to ramp up production, United 24 Media reports. In 2025 alone, it adds, these types of secretive loans exceeded $200 billion, which would essentially balloon Russia's defense spending in that year to about $350 billion. What is already over $500 billion in spending starts to look a whole lot more when you take what Russia isn't telling us into account. Several other outlets have reported on the same phenomenon of Russia actually spending far more than it claims to have spent on the war. On February 5th, TVP World reported on claims by Germany's Foreign Intelligence Agency that as much as 10% of Russia's gross domestic product, or GDP, is now going toward the war, with much of that money being spent in secret in a desperate effort to shore up Russia's army for a potential fight with NATO. Germany places Russia's 2025 spending at more than 250 billion euros, or around $294 billion, in 2025 alone when taking the hidden expenditures into account. It's also not clear if Germany's figures take into account the secretive loan mechanisms that United 24 media mentions, so it's possible that Russian war spending for 2025 alone could have hit somewhere in the region of $500 billion. In his Navigating Russia column, which he published on Substack, Craig Kennedy also exposed Russia's hidden war debt. He says that Putin has been propping up his invasion with off-budget debt, which appears to be the same state-driven and secretive war funding scheme to which United 24 media refers. There is an anomaly in Russia's corporate borrowing that Kennedy highlights. Since 2022, that anomaly has amounted to a $446 billion surge in borrowing, almost all of which has been granted to companies that directly contribute to Russia's war effort, such as weapons manufacturers. Bear in mind that the Russian state has been granting these loans, often to itself, at times when interest rates have climbed as high as 21% in Russia. What all of this means is that Putin has set his country up for financial collapse, not just with official war spending, but with all of the secretive loans that are only being made to keep the invasion going. The state has now saddled the banks with large amounts of problematic corporate war loans, Kennedy writes, adding, "Many could turn toxic once the shooting stops and defense contracts get cancelled." What this all amounts to is well over $500 billion spent officially, at least once 2025 comes to an end, and almost $500 billion more in loans that will inevitably fall to pieces once the war ends. This is going to destroy Russia. Putin has ruined Russia's economy, all for that 1.4% of Ukraine that Russia has managed to gain between 2023 and 25. And somehow it gets worse. All of this accounts for what we know, or at least sort of know, about Russia's spending on Ukraine so far. We have yet to account for the North Korea and Iran factors. Both countries have sent enormous amounts of military equipment to Russia and, in North Korea's case, even soldiers. As many as 14,000, 6,000 of whom have already died, according to Forces News. But what we don't know is how much Russia has spent to get its hands on all of this hardware and manpower. Gold, food supplies, and even cryptocurrency have been used to make purchases from Iran and North Korea, all of which can be used in an off-the-books way that could very well not be included in Russia's official military spending, or even its loans delivered to defense companies. It's also possible that Russia has bartered state secrets to get what it wants from these countries. After all, Iran and North Korea want nuclear weapons. Russia has them. It's not too much of a stretch to wonder whether Russia has traded some of what it knows for some of what these two countries can offer. In fact, Euromaidan Press made that claim in November 2025, as it reported that leaked documents suggest that much of the 6.5 million munitions that North Korea has delivered to Russia were paid for using Russian military technologies. Still, it's impossible to put a price on such trades. Outside of saying one thing, Russia would have traded some of its leverage as one of the world's few nuclear powers to get its hands on more soldiers and equipment. Though we don't know anywhere near the full extent of what Russia has given to Iran and North Korea during the war, we get snippets here and there. NK News says that North Korea has earned an estimated $20 billion from Russia for the military support it had provided up until April 2025. The same outlet said that North Korea had sent $10 billion in weapons to Russia by September 2025, though it claimed the deal between Russia and North Korea was lopsided in Russia's favor. Daily NK says that North Korea is picking up a little over $525 million per year from its troop deployments into Russia alone. If we take the Forces News number of 14,000 as given, that amounts to about 37,500 per soldier. And as for Iran, Middle East Monitor said on February 22nd that Iran had signed a deal the previous December to provide $590 million worth of missiles to Russia. There will have been many more such deals before, such as those that saw Iran provide Russia with Shahid drones. All of this adds up to a lot of money, and we only have a partial picture. And the odds are that much of it isn't being accounted for in any of Russia's official military spending or corporate loan figures. Russia is well over the $1 trillion mark in military spending at this point. United 24 media adds to all of this, noting that Russia is spending about $3 billion per month on manpower alone, as it's losing about 30,000 soldiers per month in Ukraine that it needs to replace. All told, Russia has spent roughly $100 billion on dead soldiers, due to the ludicrous wages and signing bonuses that it offers to volunteers, all of which come out of the budget we discussed. So we can add a side helping of Putin's strategic incompetence to the Ukraine war boondoggle into which Putin keeps pouring money. Russia is suffering as a result. All of this is money that is being taken away from the Russian public. Putin is sacrificing his people to fund his war, and it's all for just 1.4% of Ukraine gained in 3 years of fighting. United 24 Media offers just a small taste, stating, $300 million in ballistic missiles could build a modern hospital, a dozen schools, or housing for several thousand families. The $250 million spent on Shahid drones could fund 50 kindergartens, or more than 1,000 ambulances. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Russia has fallen miles behind in the tech, financial, and investment sectors. Putin is crippling his entire country right now, and what does he have to show for it? Not a single strategic gain has been made in Ukraine for over 3 years. If anything, Russia is in a strategic decline. As thousands more of its soldiers die in Ukraine every month, Russia faces a labor crunch, says the Cipher Brief. Economic growth in the country slowed to 0.6% in 2025, and is estimated to be only 0.8% by the end of 2026. Russia isn't making anything productive for its people or the export market because so much of the country's money is being spent on the war. There isn't a single Russian company that ranks in the top 100 technology companies in the world, the Cipher Brief points out, and Russia has even managed to fall well behind China and the US in the space race. We told you at the start of the video that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was the most stupid decision in history. Can that point be argued? Over 1 million dead or wounded for 1.4% of a country that was supposed to collapse in a matter of days. Well over $1 trillion spent and much more to come on a failing war. And as for Russia, the entire country is teetering on the verge of economic extinction, as public spending in every industry that doesn't serve the military have been cast by the wayside. Russia has made no real gains in Ukraine despite all of this sacrifice, and it's only going to get much, much worse as Ukraine shows no signs of faltering in its defense. This is failure on a catastrophic level. This is Putin's real legacy. And long after Putin is gone, Russia will be feeling the effects of the war. A moment ago, we mentioned that Russia has a labor crunch, which is being caused by so many of its people being shipped off to war. But we've only scratched the surface. What Putin has done is cripple Russia for the next century, and you can find out how if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more analysis of the brutal reality of what the special military operation has really cost Russia. And thank you as always for watching.